When I think back on it, I'd have to say that it all started with the Golden Lotus. The Golden Lotus is a famous Chinese restaurant about 2 hours away from where I live. It is a long way to go for dinner, as Mom pointed out to Dad when his cousin first invited us to come for a birthday party. Dad said, "I haven't seen BD for years and my uncle is turning 75, we should go." My big sister, Regina, squealed, "The Golden Lotus is supposed to be amazing, we have to go. They have Peking honey bananas." My big brother, Kenny, said, "I'm in. Chinese banquets are seriously loaded." I said, "Mama Lucia's is having a pizza and pasta special on Saturday, and they're showing the NBA All-Star game on the big screen." Guess who didn't get her way? When we walked into the Golden Lotus, though even I had to admit that it was the most beautiful restaurant I had ever been to. The first thing I saw were dozens of glittering, sparkling chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The carpet was thick and springy, with an intricate pattern of medallions and flowers on a royal blue background. The hostess was really pretty, too, dressed in a red kippah and matching high-heeled sandals. The dress had a slit that went up high along one leg. Mom raised her eyebrows when she saw that. The hostess led us through the whole huge restaurant, past tanks of fish and long scrolls and tables full of diners. As we approached each table, I tried to guess if it was the table with BD. I wondered if he had the thick, glossy hair that my dad claims is the pride of the Wu family. But no, instead we went past the whole room full of tables to the back of the restaurant and into a hallway. The hallway had several doors leading off of it. I was beginning to wonder whether the hostess was going to show us the bathrooms when she stopped and opened a door. "Cool," said Kenny. "We get a private room." The room had dark paneling and a big round table in the middle. The people in the room were laughing and talking, but when we walked in, they all stopped and looked at us. I ducked behind Mom. I hate that feeling of everyone staring at me. "Steve," one man stepped forward, calling my dad. He did not have the pride of the Wu family hair. He had a round, shiny, bald head. "BD, it's been too long," said Dad. They hugged, thumping each other on the back. After Mom and BD shook hands, Dad introduced Regina. I held my breath and waited for it. BD's eyes bugged out. "Nama Pio Liang," he exclaimed. "So pretty." He stepped backward as if Regina's beauty actually took up room. Regina blushed, but you'd think she'd be used to it by now. People can't help themselves, admiring her smooth pink-white skin and her long, thick eyelashes, so unusual for a Chinese girl. And yes, she has the Wu family hair, so silky and shiny that children reach up to stroke it. If you don't know the word for pretty in Chinese, you'd learn it soon enough hanging around Regina in a Chinese restaurant. Kenny, who is 4 years younger than Regina and 3 years older than me, bent down and whispered, "Why do you want to bet Dad mentions MathWiz when he introduces me?" I rolled my eyes. Last year, Kenny came in third in a statewide math contest. Now he stays after school twice a week so that he can practice and become an even bigger math geek. "This is Kenny," Dad said, putting a hand on Kenny's shoulder. Before Dad could say anything else, BD said, "The math genius. Of course, have you started thinking about colleges?" Kenny looked around the room and started to drift away. I think he was looking for a place to hide. Kenny usually avoids sustained contact with adults. "And of course, Lucy." Dad patted me on the head as if I were a dog. BD looked at me and smiled politely. I guess after exclaiming over Regina and Kenny, he had run out of things to say. All around the room, people were speaking Chinese. One group of ladies was involved in an excited conversation, their voices rat-a-tatting like machine guns. I grabbed Kenny by the elbow. "Don't leave me," I begged. I was terrified that someone might try to start a conversation with me. "If we got past, how are you? And how old are you?" I was in deep trouble in the Chinese-speaking department. "Woshi Sui," I practiced in my mind. "I'm 11. "Relax," said Kenny. He pulled out a huge paperback biography of Benjamin Franklin and slid into a chair. Once Kenny immerses himself in a book, there's no chance of a decent conversation, so I pretended to be fascinated by the carved chair I was sitting in. Ooh, such nice carvings of flowers and leaves. What pretty wood. Luckily, a waiter showed up, and everyone took that as a signal to find a seat. At least Kenny would have to put his book away now and talk to me. The chairs around the table began to fill with people. I was glad that I had grabbed one next to Kenny. I caught one of the rat-a-tat ladies giving me a funny look. Then she leaned over and said something to the person next to her, and she pointed her chopsticks at me. How rude. Before I could glare back at her, Regina tapped me on the shoulder. "Lucy, get up, you need to change seats." "Excuse me, you're not the boss of me." I turned away from her. She probably wanted to sit next to Kenny. "I'm serious. Get up." She was using that mean whisper that I'd seen mothers use with small children at the library. I looked around the table. There were 2 empty seats left. I could see Regina's purse hanging from one, and there was one by the door next to another rat-a-tat lady. "What is your problem?" I mean whispered back. Then I heard a gentle cough behind Regina. An old man was standing there. I think it was his birthday we were celebrating. He made a little wave with the back of his hand and said something. It looked like he was saying, "Don't worry about it." Regina shook her head and then smiled pleasantly as she gripped my arm tightly and lifted me out of my chair with one hand. Ouch! Suddenly, I realized that everyone at the table was watching us. I dropped my head and let Regina steer me toward the last empty chair. When the table began to rumble with conversation again, Regina said, "The chair farthest from the door is for the oldest person. Didn't you know that?" Obviously, I didn't know that. Regina, on the other hand, wasn't even in college yet, but it was like she practically majored in being Chinese. Me, I just wanted a menu to hide my face. Maybe they had my favorite, orange beef. We didn't get menus. Instead of asking what we wanted, the waiters just brought in a huge tureen of soup on a cart and started serving bowl after bowl. At first I was excited, because I love wonton soup, but this soup turned out to have veiny green vegetables and big black mushrooms. While everyone else happily slurped down their soup, I pressed the back of my spoon into the soup so that I only scooped up the broth. The waiters started to bring in a whole line of dishes, each one scarier than the last. A whole fish with dead eyes that stared at me. Baby octopus with tiny tentacles that I imagined tickling the insides of my mouth. There was one plate I would not have even figured out if Regina hadn't squealed. Jellyfish. Yeah. I heaped some plain white rice on my plate and began to eat it slowly. Slowly enough to last the whole meal. Mom caught my eye and made him a yummy face. I scowled back. Clank. The lady sitting next to me plopped 2 small oysters onto my plate. She seemed nicer than Mrs. Rude Pointer, so I smiled as politely as I could and shook my head. This only seemed to encourage her. She plucked up an oyster and gulped down the slimy insides and then showed me the empty shell. I shuddered and ate another mouthful of rice. To be fair, I'm kind of a picky eater. Everyone loves blueberries, but to me, they just look like tiny blue eyeballs. And milk, don't get me started on milk. Ta hui jiang zhang wen ma. The oyster lady looked at my parents and gestured toward me. I knew what that meant. She wanted to know if I could speak Chinese. Ta ting dong, Dad answered. She understands what she hears. This was being generous. I only understood a little bit. At the other end of the table, Kenny was having a great time. Kenny eats anything and everything, and the old man who took my seat and the other woman sitting next to Kenny took turns heaping food on his plate, urging him to eat more. BD leaned over and said something to Mom while tilting his head toward Regina, who was practically ruling over the table, enjoying her food and chatting in perfect Chinese. My mom beamed and said something back. And something else. And something more. Even though I couldn't hear what she was saying exactly, she was undoubtedly telling him that Regina had won a full scholarship to Hamilton University, and she had won it because she had started the Chinese Culture and Language Society at school. Regina had single-handedly gotten the school to offer Chinese as a class, persuaded the PTA to buy Chinese language software, and brought dozens of speakers to school to discuss Chinese language, food, history, and culture. I could tell that Mom was about to induct one more person into the Isn't Regina Woo Wonderful Club. At that moment, I really, really hated Regina, and I really, really wanted a plate of lasagna. The oyster lady now seemed to make it her personal mission to find me something to eat. She spooned some beef on my plate that looked promising, but it was so spicy it made my eyes water. Some tofu? The texture made me shudder. She lifted a thin pink slice of something onto my plate. It looked like ham, but at this point I was suspicious. Zhai shi shenma? I asked in my best, politest Chinese. What is this? Zhu duo. She responded cheerfully, taking another slice for herself. My brain started clicking. These words sounded familiar. Suddenly, I pictured the Chinese baby video I used to watch ages ago. It had animals, colors, and parts of the body. Wait, Zhu meant pig. For the first time that evening, I felt a little excited. Maybe I did know more Chinese than I thought. I smiled at the oyster lady and tried to remember what duo meant. That sounded like a word from the video, too. My stomach dropped. I remembered the body parts section of the video. Duo means ear. Pig ear? No, thank you. I wrinkled my mouth shut and shook my head. I was so grossed out that I couldn't even eat the Peking duck she put on my plate, its crispy skin just waiting to crackle in my mouth. I took another bite of rice. A waiter clattered into the room with another cart and began serving each person from a large, shallow bowl. Whatever it was, it must be something so good that they wanted to make sure everyone got one. I turned my head to see what it was, but too many people were leaning over their plates, blocking my view. Plunk. The waiter dropped it on my plate with a soft thud. It was small and gray, no bigger than a deck of cards. It wasn't pretty either, like some of the other dishes. It looked like bits of meat tacked together in one lump. What was this? I leaned back in my chair, and that's when I stopped looking at the mystery lump as a bunch of parts. There was a head, body, and legs. It was a perfectly skinned and cooked frog. The oyster lady leaned over and said her first words in English all night. "Like chicken," she smiled widely. Suddenly, I was very grateful that Regina had forced me to sit near the door. I jumped out of my seat and started running. Where was that bathroom?